Hello, and welcome back to Boss Economics World, the only show on the internet that looks at the global economy and asks, are you kidding me? I'm your host, and today, my friends, we have a story so perfectly distilled, so richly emblematic of our current financial era, that it feels like it was written in a lab by a team of satirists. But it's real. Oh, it's very real. The date is October 7, 2025, and the God Emperor of Mars, Elon Musk, has just performed a feat of corporate governance so audacious, so breathtakingly absurd, that it makes WeWork's S1 filing read like a Warren Buffett shareholder letter. The news, hot off the presses from the Financial Times, Musk has appointed a single human being, a former Morgan Stanley executive named Anthony Armstrong, to be the chief financial officer of both XAI and X, the social media platform formerly known as Twitter. You heard that right. One CFO to rule them all. One man to straddle two corporate entities with financial needs so diametrically opposed they might as well be on different planets. On one hand, you have X, a social media platform that needs to be nursed back to financial health. That's a delicate FT euphemism for a dumpster fire that's been doused in gasoline and is currently hemorrhaging advertisers, users, and cash. Its financial strategy should be one of brutal austerity, cost-cutting, and a desperate search for profitability. On the other hand, you have XAI, the crown jewel of the AI bubble, a startup valued at $200 billion just last month. Its mission? To burn money faster than a rocket engine. We're talking a reported loss of $1 billion per month. Its financial strategy is not profit. It's not efficiency. It's to scream at the capital markets, give me more, like a hedge fund Oliver Twist, so it can buy every last NVIDIA chip on the planet. Appointing one person to be the CFO of both is not a strategic masterstroke. It's like hiring one doctor to simultaneously manage a patient on a crash diet and a competitive hot dog eater, and telling him the prescription for both is unlimited capital. This isn't a CFO, folks. This is a chief contradiction officer. A chief financial juggler. A chief firefighting officer for a two-front blaze. And this single news item, the seemingly mundane executive appointment, is the perfect thread to pull. Because when we pull it, the entire, glittering, unstable tapestry of the mid-2020s economy begins to unravel. So strap in, because we're going from the point this one higher to the surface, to analyze the magnificent, terrifying economic issues at play. Let's start with the obvious. XAI's valuation. $200 billion. Let's put that number in perspective. As of today, in late 2025, that valuation makes this pre-revenue, pre-product market fit startup more valuable than the Walt Disney Company, more valuable than Nike, more valuable than the entire market cap of the German automotive industry combined. And what are investors buying for that $200 billion? They are buying a promise. A narrative. They are buying proximity to Elon Musk, and they are buying a ticket to the AI lottery. But most importantly, they are buying a company that is, by its own admission, losing $12 billion a year. We used to have metrics for this stuff. Price to earnings, price to sales. Those are quaint, 20th century artifacts now. Welcome to 2025, where the key metric is the price to burn ratio. For XAI, that's a $200 billion valuation divided by a $12 billion annual burn rate, giving it a PB ratio of about 16.7. This means investors are paying 16.7 times the amount of money the company is actively setting on fire each year. This isn't investing, it's sponsoring performance art. This is the dot-com bubble on steroids, laced with venture capital FOMO and mainlined with sovereign wealth fund capital. In 1999, companies at least pretended they had a path to profitability. They'd show you a chart with eyeballs, clicks, or some other vanity metric that, if you squinted and drank enough Kool-Aid, looked like it might one day become revenue. Today, the narrative is much purer, much more potent. It's not about revenue. It's about compute. The thesis, relentlessly pushed by Silicon Valley, is that access to computational power, specifically, massive clusters of NVIDIA's latest H2000 and B3000 GPUs, is the new oil. Whoever owns the most compute will build the most powerful artificial general intelligence, and that AGI will unlock trillions of dollars in economic value. Therefore, spending billions on data centers isn't a cost, it's an asset. It's digital land grabbing. The problem? This creates a feedback loop of pure speculative mania. Look at the numbers. Just last year, in 2024, the top 5 AI labs collectively raised over $150 billion in capital. The global AI infrastructure spending for 2025 is projected to top $500 billion, according to a recent Goldman Sachs report. Where is this money going? Primarily to one company, NVIDIA, whose market cap just crossed the $4 trillion mark, making it more valuable than the GDP of most G7 nations. We've created a GPU to unicorn pipeline. A startup's valuation is no longer based on its team, its tech, or its business model. It's a simple formula, number of H2000 GPUs secured, X, Musk-Altman-Hasabi's coefficient, plus, current level of market hysteria, equals valuation. This is a bubble of historic proportions, and Anthony Armstrong's job at XAI isn't to create a sustainable financial model. It's to be the chief shovel officer, tasked with convincing the world to shovel ever larger mountains of cash into the furnace to keep the compute dream alive. Now, let's talk about the dual-hatted role. In any sane universe, the board of directors of a public company would laugh you out of the room for suggesting the CFO also be the CFO of another, completely separate, and financially conflicted company controlled by the same majority shareholder. This is Corporate Governance 101. The CFO's primary duty is a fiduciary one to act in the best financial interests of the company and its shareholders. So, whose interests does Mr. Armstrong serve? Let's play out a scenario. It's Q2 2026. X is facing a massive debt payment from the original Twitter buyout. Advertisers are still spooked by the platform's volatility. To avoid default, CFO Armstrong needs to slash costs mercilessly. That means layoffs, shutting down data centers, and cutting non-essential projects. Meanwhile, over at XAI, CEO Musk wants to pre-order 100,000 of NVIDIA's next-generation super-duper mind-bender 5,000 GPUs at a cost of $5 billion to get ahead of OpenAI. CFO Armstrong needs to go out and raise a new funding round at a $300 billion valuation to pay for it. What happens when a bank, considering a loan to X, looks at the CFO and asks about the stability of the enterprise, knowing he's also trying to raise billions for a high-risk, cash-burning venture next door? What happens when a sovereign wealth fund, considering an investment in XAI, asks about the potential for Musk to divert resources or attention back to the black hole that is X? The conflict of interest is staggering. Which company gets the CFO's prime attention? The dying patient or the cash-hungry prodigy? Does he pitch a conservative, turnaround story for X or a high-growth, world-changing story for XAI? The two messages are fundamentally incompatible. What if XAI wants to use X's vast data trove for training its models? Who negotiates the price? CFO Armstrong on one side of the table and CFO Armstrong on the other? It's a financial parody. This isn't an accident, it's a feature of what I call the founder-king model of Silicon Valley. We've spent a decade Leoneizing founders who defy convention, break rules, and consolidate power. From Zuckerberg's dual-class shares at Meta to Adam Neumann's antics at WeWork, venture capitalists have consistently traded governance for access to charismatic, supposedly visionary leaders. With Musk, this is taken to its logical extreme. He has created an interlocking ecosystem, the Muskonomy, of Tesla, SpaceX, XAI, and Neuralink, and the Boring Company. These are not truly independent entities. They are fiefdoms in the Musk empire. The value of Tesla stock provides the collateral for Musk's personal loans, which he used to buy Twitter. The engineering talent from Tesla gets seconded to work on Optimus robots, which will be powered by AI from XAI. The data from X trains the models for XAI. Armstrong's role is not that of a traditional CFO. He is the chancellor of the exchequer for the Muskonomy. His job is to manage the complex web of leverage, cross-collateralization, and narrative synergy that holds the entire thing together. It's a spectacular feat of financial engineering, but it's also a house of cards. A significant downturn in Tesla's stock, a major failure at SpaceX, or a regulatory crackdown on X could trigger a cascade of margin calls and financial crises across the entire empire. Okay, so a few billionaires are playing high-stakes poker with Saudi money. Why should the average person care? Because this isn't happening in a vacuum. The sheer gravitational pull of the AI bubble is distorting the entire economic landscape. We are witnessing a capital misallocation event of historic proportions. Think about that $150 billion raised by a handful of AI labs in 2024. That is more than the total global venture capital investment in climate tech and biotech combined. While we are desperately trying to fund the energy transition, find cures for diseases, and rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, a staggering percentage of the world's risk capital is being funneled into a handful of companies in one zip code, all chasing the same abstract, far-off goal of AGI. This creates a talent and capital vortex. The smartest PhDs in physics, math, and engineering are no longer going into energy, aerospace, or manufacturing. They're being lured to AI labs with seven-figure salaries to work on optimizing language models. Small and medium-sized businesses, the backbone of the real economy, are finding it harder to get loans because banks are increasingly focused on the seemingly higher returns of the tech sector. The Federal Reserve is in a bind. In a normal world, the Fed's interest rate hikes over the past few years should have popped this kind of speculative bubble. Higher rates make borrowing more expensive and should favor investments in companies with real, near-term cash flows. But the AI bubble has proven remarkably resilient. Why? Because the narrative is just too powerful. The promise of AI is that it will be a massive deflationary force. It will supposedly make everything cheaper, boost productivity to unimaginable levels, and solve all our problems. This narrative provides political and economic cover for the federal. They can tell themselves, yes, there's some froth, but this technology will ultimately help us in our fight against inflation. It's a dangerous game of chicken. Meanwhile, the real economy starves. A recent report from the Kauffman Foundation showed that new business formation outside of the tech sector has stagnated for the last 18 months, citing access to capital as the primary barrier. This is the opportunity cost of the AI bubble. For every $1 billion burned by XAI on GPUs, that's $1 billion not being invested in a new factory, a new grid technology, or a new medical device. So, what's the endgame here? As the host of Boss Economics World, I'm contractually obligated to give you a hot take, seasoned with a healthy dose of cynicism. Prediction 1: Armstrong will succeed. For a while. His immediate goal is not profitability. It's to raise the next, even bigger funding round for XAI. And he will likely succeed. There is simply too much dry powder on the sidelines, from sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East to pension funds desperate for returns, not to take a bet. Expect to see a headline in Q1 2026, XAI raises $20 billion at a $350 billion valuation. Armstrong will be hailed as a genius. Prediction 2: The X/XAI conflict will explode. The inherent contradiction in the CFO role will become untenable. It will likely be triggered by an external shock. Perhaps a regulator like the SEC will launch an investigation into the intercompany dealings. Or perhaps a major creditor for X will call a covenant, forcing a financial crisis that pits the needs of one company directly against the other. The dual role will be revealed not as a synergy, but as a critical point of failure. Prediction 3: The bubble will pop, but not how you think. The great AI bubble won't be pricked by a single Lehman moment. It will be a slow, painful deflation. The trigger will be something mundane. It could be a disappointing earnings report from NVIDIA, showing that enterprise demand for AI is not materializing as fast as hoped. It could be a series of academic papers demonstrating that large language models are hitting a hard plateau in their capabilities, and that AGI is still decades away. When that happens, the narrative will crack. The price-to-burn ratio will suddenly seem less like a visionary metric and more like what it is, a measure of insanity. The capital will dry up, the compute is an asset thesis will evaporate, and we will be left with a handful of bloated and profitable research labs and a landscape of starved, neglected real economy industries. So, as we look at the appointment of Anthony Armstrong, we are not just seeing one man taking on an impossible job. We are seeing a perfect snapshot of our economic zeitgeist. An era defined by narrative over numbers, by founder worship over corporate governance, and by a massive, speculative concentration of capital into a narrow, uncertain future. It's a thrilling, terrifying, and utterly fascinating circus. And you can bet we here at Boss Economics World will have a front row seat, armed with popcorn and a healthy dose of skepticism. What do you think? Is this the most brilliant strategic move of the 21st century or the most spectacular display of financial hubris ever seen? Is the AI bubble just getting started, or are we staring at the peak? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into this glorious economic circus. Stay cynical, folks.